In this video, we're going to give you a basic guide to finding your way around the VCarve Pro interface. When you first start the software, it'll look as it does on the screen at the moment. And down the left-hand side here, you'll have a bar where you have choices to create a new file, to open an existing VCarve Pro file, or it'll also list the 4 most recently opened VCarve Pro files to give you easy access to things you may have just been working on. Let's start by clicking on the option here to create a new file. When we do this, the software requires us to enter the size of the job we're working on and also to indicate where the X, Y, Z, 0 position is going to be on the CNC machine relative to our job. At the bottom here we choose whether we're working in inches or metric, and then we can hit OK to go into the main interface of the program. We're now in the environment where we're going to create our two-dimensional design and where we're going to calculate the different toolpaths that we want to ultimately save and run on the CNC machine to create our part. The main way that we're going to control what happens in the program is through the icons on the Drawing tab and the Toolpaths tab, and we'll come back and look at those in a moment. It's also worth noting before we move on that you can access most of the functions in the software through the drop-down menus at the top of the interface here. You can see if I move the mouse over the different words here, then a menu will cascade down with a variety of choices that apply to that particular subject. Within that menu we could just click on items to choose them, or some options, like this one here, have this little side arrow pointing to the right, and that indicates that there's a sub-menu available for additional options that relate to that. Coming back to the icons, these are organised into 2 main areas. When we're doing our design, creating our vector layout, then we're going to use icons on the Drawing tab, and this is what's displayed by default when we first opened our new part. You can see that on the left here. All the icons on this tab relate to us creating the design element of our part. At the top we have options to import files and do some of the standard Windows controls like cut, copy, paste, undo and redo. Then we have various controls for the views. We have a quick access to our layer manager, which we'll talk more about in a moment. Then we have our drawing tools and our vector editing tools down towards the bottom of this tab here. The drawing tab can be selected by clicking on the tab at the bottom here. And to complement this, we also have a fuller version of the layers. If I click on this area here that says layers, we go into a longer layer manager that includes the same functions we have access to from the smaller one on the drawing tab, but also has these arrows to allow me to reorder the layers that I'm working with. Layers are something we use in the software to help organize our 2D data, and you'll learn more about these throughout the different tutorials. To get back to the Drawing tab, I can just click back on the tab at the bottom here, and you'll see we now have access to our drawing icons again. The idea of creating this vector data, this 2D design in the software, is to allow us to go and use the toolpath functions that we have in order to calculate the paths that will drive the CNC. All the icons for the toolpaths are located on the Toolpaths tab, and that by default is over on the right hand side here of the interface. You can see if we look towards the top right hand corner here, we have the word Toolpaths. If I move the cursor over that and pause for a moment, then the Toolpaths tab will pop out. Now I can access functions from it in its current state, or if I wanted to pin it in position so that I always have access to these, I can come up and click on this little icon here, which is a pin, and that will fix it in place on the right hand side of the interface. At the top of the Toolpaths tab we have information about the size of our part and our datum position. This is everything we entered when we did the initial job setup, but before you calculate any toolpaths you'll always want to come into here, either double check the values visually from here or click on the set button to go into the material setup form and make any edits you need to before you actually generate the data in the correct position and size that you want it for the machine. Within the icons themselves, the first 2 lines are all the different toolpath strategies that you can access. Things like profiling, pocketing, texturing, V-carving, all the different things that you'll see demonstrated in the tutorials. The third line is administrative options, so things like editing, copying, deleting and recalculating toolpaths. The fourth line allows you to access the tool database, which is where we store all the information, speeds and feeds and the parameters that we want to use for the set of tools that we have, as well as things to do with what we call toolpath templates and tiling. And finally, we have a row where we can access our preview, which we'll look at in a moment, estimate how long the toolpaths are going to take, and save the toolpaths, which is particularly important because at that stage we're going to choose what we call a post-processor to output them in the correct format for the CNC. The bottom area of the Toolpaths tab here will show us a list of all the different toolpaths that we've calculated, and we'll see that in a moment when we open a part that actually has some toolpaths in it. So as we've seen, it's possible for us to have both sets of icons, both the Drawing tab and the Toolpath tabs, pinned into place and accessible simultaneously. It's also possible though, if you want to maximise your workspace, to hide the one that you're not currently using. You remember when we first opened the program we could only see the Drawing tab. We came up and we pinned the Toolpath tab into place. If I want to unpin this, I'll just come over the same icon, click it again, and now the Toolpath tab's gone back to being hidden. Now to move between the two tabs, we can use this icon here, which will hide the Drawing tab and open the Toolpaths tab when we click on it, as so. Or this icon here, which will do the reverse. Here you can see that says switch to Drawing tab. If I click on that, then the Toolpaths tab gets hidden and the Drawing tab gets opened again so I can access the icons on it. If you have a large enough screen, or perhaps you're working with dual monitors, then it's worth noting that you can actually tear off the tabs and move them into a completely different position. They'll become free floating objects that you can actually position outside of the main software interface but still have access to the icons. Would recommend while you're learning the program though to stick with them in their default positions because that's where they'll be shown throughout all the tutorials. There is an important part of the interface that we haven't yet referenced. This is what we refer to as the 2D view and the 3D view. We can access these from these two tabs at the top of the main window here. The one that's currently displayed shows the 2D view, and that's what we've been able to see since we first opened the program. If we click on the other tab, we go into the 3D view. Go back to the 2D view, we just click back on the tab that has the name of the file in it. Currently that's shown as new because we haven't yet saved this file and given it a different name. The 2D view is where we do all our design, create and edit our vectors in order to get them ready for us to calculate toolpaths. The 3D view is where we'll see the toolpaths once we've generated them, and also where we can preview those toolpaths in a virtual piece of material so we can see exactly what the part will look like before we cut it. This is easier to demonstrate with a file that has some data in it. So what I'm going to do is open an example that's actually one of those that's covered in the other video tutorials. Let's click on File Open, we'll click on the file name here, hit the Open button, and you can see that now in the 2D view we actually have some data that we can look at. Now one thing to notice is this is a different size and orientation of job than we were working with before. We can see in the bottom of the Drawing tab here our job dimensions are displayed for us, so it tells me the width, height and the z-depth of this particular job setup. Also you'll notice now in the layer manager, the small version we have here, if I click on the down arrow you can see the 4 layers that this job is organised into. If I hit close and click on the layers tab itself so we can look at the larger version of the manager, you can see we have the same information repeated there. Here obviously we've got the capacity to cope with a much longer list. Let's click back on the Drawing tab. Let's take a more detailed look now at some of the things that apply specifically to the 2D view. By default, the software is in a state that we refer to as selection mode. That's indicated by the hard white arrow you can see being the representation of my cursor. At this mode I can click on individual items in the job to select them, or I can click and drag a box around to select multiple items, and this is in order to make edits to them or to select them for toolpath calculation. And this selection mode is important because it's normally the state that I want to get back to after I've been executing other functions. For instance, we'll now look at some of the tools we've got to navigate our way around the 2D view, but after each of these we really want to return to this selection mode. We can do that either by clicking on the arrow here or by hitting the escape key on the keyboard. So under the 2D view control here, we've got some key commands that allow us to move and navigate around the view in order to see objects better or to help us get to a specific point on it to draw something. First one is the pan view. If I click on this, you'll see that the cursor has changed to this four-way arrow, and now if I click in the drawing and move the mouse, it lets me drag it around in order to move it to a different position. Then if I wanted to return to selection mode, I just come down and click on the arrow here and I'm back in my normal arrow mode in order to allow me to pick and draw things again. As well as the pan mode, we can also use the scroll bars at the side in order to move the object around to see different parts of it. The next three icons under 2D view control are all concerned with zooming. The first one is allowing me to zoom to a specific box. So if I click on that, what the software wants me to do, and you'll notice the cursor has changed again now to a magnifying glass, is it'll want me to click once, drag with the mouse and let go, and it'll zoom in on that area where I selected that square. And again, we can zoom in on smaller and smaller areas if we want to. Once more, once I want to exit the zoom mode, I would come across and click on the arrow here, or I can hit the escape key on the keyboard as well. The next icon fits my job back into the window. So if we click on that, you can see it's just going to fit everything back in again. That's a very useful one to remember, for as you move and navigate your way around the part, you've always got a way to get back so you can see everything. The third of the zoom icons lets me zoom to a specific object. So before I do that, I need to select the object I want to zoom in on, then I can come across, click zoom selected, and you can see that's just going to zoom in on that selected object. And I could have multiple objects selected if I wanted to as well. Once more, to go back to the standard view, we can just click on the icon to zoom to fit. If your mouse has a wheel, it's also possible to zoom dynamically. So what I could do is just position my mouse over an area I wanted to zoom in on and roll the mouse wheel away from me in order to zoom in where my mouse arrow is, roll the mouse towards me in order to zoom out again. Something else that's accessed within the 2D view are what we call context-sensitive menus. These are a set of commands that you can access by hitting the right mouse key on your mouse. So here now, if I just press my right mouse key, you'll see I get a selection of commands appear that I can choose from. Now these will relate to the current state the program's in, or perhaps what you have selected, or even where the cursor is in relation to the object you have selected. To give you an example, if I come in here and select a vector, maybe we'll click on the icon to zoom selected again, and I'll go into what we call node editing mode. So if I come over here and click on this icon, you can see we can access the individual parts of this vector. Now as I move the cursor, you'll see it changes slightly as I move over different types of object. So as I move over a node itself, I get these crosshairs. As I move over a span in between, then I get the arrow with the wavy line there. Now depending which one of these I'm over will depend what context sensitive menu appears when I hit the right mouse key. So here over a node, if I hit the right mouse key, you can see I have options to delete that point, to cut it, to make that the start point. Or if I go over a span and right mouse key, I get options to convert it to a line, to a curve, to insert points. So the idea of this is that it's context sensitive, which means that it will understand the current state you're in and what you're hovering over with the mouse when you press that right mouse key, and give you options that are applicable to that situation. This is a very, very powerful way to access commands within the software. Now something else to point out here is you'll notice that each of these commands has a letter over on the right hand side. These are what's known as shortcut keys, and they would actually allow me to access those commands without coming into the menu first, as long as the cursor was in the right place to access them. So again, these are context sensitive. In order to be able to convert a span to a line, I need to make sure that the cursor is over that span when I hit the L key on the keyboard. And you'll see these demonstrated throughout the different tutorials. Let's come back and click on selection mode, click back up to zoom to fit. And now let's go into the 3D view and look at some of the characteristics that we're going to be able to see in there. Here you can see we have our virtual piece of material. This is set to the size that we created our job, so 30 by 12 by 1 inches. If we go over to the toolpaths tab, we can see now that we have this list of toolpaths here. These have already been calculated in this part, and if I wanted to, I could click on the square at the top here to check all those toolpaths and draw them within the 3D view. So if I rotate this around, we can see that the software understands that these toolpaths we've created have a 3D shape to them. They're moving within 3 dimensions. It may be that they're only cutting a pocket, but that might be on multiple levels, as we can see as we tilt the part around. Now I can undraw these toolpaths by unchecking them if I wanted to just look at specific ones, or we can just click the box at the top again there to either draw all or hide all the toolpaths. Now, as well as being able to see the lines as we can see here, a much more useful way of being able to visualize the toolpaths is what we call the preview. Once we've calculated toolpaths, we'll go into the preview form. So if I click on the icon here, and in the 3D view, I can actually take any individual toolpath or all of them and preview the result of that toolpath. So here, if I click on the first one and say preview selected toolpath, I can see what that pocketing command is going to do. Then I could pick on the next one and work my way through, and each one of these I'm able to visualize within the 3D view there. So it's actually giving me a virtual representation of the tool shape and the parameters that I've selected there, and showing me what the result of that is going to be. Now, in the preview mode like this, once I have created something like this profile pass where we've gone all the way through the material, it's possible for me to hide the areas of the part that are essentially the stock that we're going to throw away after we've cut the part out, so that we can better see our finished part. I do that just by double clicking on those areas with the mouse. So I just put the mouse on that area and just double click with it in order to erase that from the 3D view. So I can go over all these pieces that we'd get rid of, and now I have a way of visualizing my part really nicely as a virtual shaded object. And that's even possible to save this image that we can see in the 3D view by clicking on the button here to save preview image. Now, because that will effectively take a snapshot of exactly what's displayed in the 3D view, it's important to be able to manipulate what we can see, or maybe what we're zoomed in on. Just like the 2D view, I can pan around within my 3D view, but here I do it by holding down both the left mouse key and the right mouse key simultaneously, and then moving the mouse. So I have both the left and right mouse key held down at the moment, and that allows me to move this around. And that's important because when I zoom in, I'm going to zoom in on whatever is in the center of my 3D view. So here, if I move that to this position here, now to zoom in on that, I can either use the mouse wheel, or I can also hold down the right mouse key. So if you don't have a mouse wheel, you can hold down the right mouse key, move the mouse away from you in order to zoom in, move the mouse towards you to zoom out. There are also some preset views at the top of the interface here where I can go back and zoom to fit. I can look at this in what we call the isometric view, which is the second icon here. We can look directly down the z-axis, directly down the x-axis, or directly down the y-axis. So we go back to an ISO view there. I can also rotate the view around by clicking the left mouse key and moving the mouse. So if I click the left mouse key here and just move the mouse around, you can see I can rotate the part apart in order to see it from different angles. And sometimes it's nice to be able to see both the 2D view and the 3D view simultaneously, particularly when you're picking vectors and calculating toolpaths. If I go ahead and just close our preview here, I'm going to click on the icon to go back to the drawing tab, and you can see these two icons here under the 2D view control allow me to do something called tiling the windows. This one will tile the windows vertically, so if I click on that, I'm shown the 2D view on the left, the 3D view on the right. If I click on the next one, it tiles the windows horizontally, which for the orientation of this part would probably make more sense because that puts the 2D view at the top and the 3D view at the bottom. And it's possible then for me to just select from the 2D view here, or to go into the 3D view and access the same commands that I was just showing you in order to rotate, move this around, or even for us to go ahead and pop out the toolpaths tab, pin that into place, fit those windows and now go ahead and select or draw or preview the toolpaths as well. So you've seen how flexible the VCarve Pro interface is. You've seen how to move around the different sets of icons and how to adjust and navigate within the 2D and 3D view. Throughout the tutorials you're going to see these processes repeated in all the different examples we show you. And that concludes this video.